When a grief-stricken Clara DeWitt encounters a trembling stray cat in the rain, she has no idea it will bring her face to face with James, a gentle soul wrestling with his own ghosts. Their shared act of kindness sparks a bond that not only saves a lost animal, but also helps them find hope, love, and a chance to build a new life together. Clara DeWitt woke before dawn every morning, drawn from restless slumber by an unnamed ache in her chest. The small apartment she rented in Pine Harbor, a sleepy lakeside town where everyone seemed to know one another, felt both comforting and isolating. She had moved here 3 months ago, having left behind a job she couldn't stand in a city that never quite felt like home. Now, she shared her space with piles of unpacked boxes and her own lingering regret for all the things that had gone wrong in her life. She had recently lost her father after a prolonged illness, and her grief still rested heavily on her shoulders. Nightmares visited her occasionally, replaying hospital corridors under unforgiving fluorescent lights. She had spent weeks by his bedside, holding his hand, trying to memorize the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled. Letting go had been the hardest part, though his gentle voice still lingered in her memory. "Make a life you can be proud of, Clara." She could almost feel him in the room when she awoke, as if his spirit was guiding her into a new day. Yet, despite her father's words urging her to find a life of purpose and contentment, she found herself stuck. Every morning was the same. She'd switch on the coffee machine and listen to it groan to life. She'd stare through the window at the deserted street below, watch the slow swirl of dawn light, and feel the absence of companionship more keenly than ever. Her small living room, decorated simply with a second-hand couch and a sagging bookshelf, looked warm, even cozy. But it lacked the sound of another voice. She sometimes thought of adopting a pet, but she couldn't bring herself to commit to the responsibility. She was barely managing her own needs, and the idea of caring for another creature weighed on her mind as both a comfort and a burden. She worked from home now, a freelance editor combing through manuscripts for aspiring writers. The solitary nature of her job suited her, at least on the surface. After all, editing required concentration and silence, and Pine Harbor offered plenty of that. But she wondered if she had gone too far in her search for peace, because in the hush of her small-town existence, the echo of loneliness rang loud. Her father's death had opened a void she didn't know how to fill, and though she was skilled at building her own walls, practical, methodical, and independent, she couldn't escape the yearning for something more, for someone to share the quiet moments with, for something unexpected to break the monotony of her days. Each evening, Clara forced herself out for a walk by the lake, hoping the brisk air would soothe her mind. Sometimes it helped. She'd focus on the steady crunch of gravel underfoot, the water's gentle lap against the rocks, the hazy pink and orange streaks across the sky at sunset. If she was lucky, she'd come home more at ease. Other times the walk intensified her loneliness. She'd catch sight of couples holding hands or families out for a stroll, and she'd be reminded of how alone she truly was in this town. Yet, she didn't have the energy to join any clubs or to be social. She had been invited by neighbors to a potluck once, politely, kindly, but she declined with some excuse about a work deadline. Deep down, she was afraid of forging relationships that would only increase the pain of loss someday. It was easier, she thought, to keep to herself. That night, in the scattered glow of street lamps, she noticed the old "for sale" sign still hanging askew on the battered house next door. The property had sat abandoned for years, rumored to have all sorts of structural issues. Clara sometimes wondered if that neglected home reflected her own emotional state, shabby, unlit, closed to the outside world. Before turning in, she paused at her front door and stared up at the starry sky, remembering her father's final words once more. They pressed on her heart like a warm but weighty hand, urging her to live. At that moment, a faint mewling drifted through the night air, though she couldn't quite place its source. She listened for a heartbeat, but all she heard was the wind sighing. Dismissing it as a trick of her restless mind, she went inside. After placing her keys on the kitchen table, she brewed a cup of tea, chamomile with a drop of honey, and curled up on the couch. A half-finished manuscript on her laptop demanded her attention, but her thoughts strayed. She let the night's hush envelop her. The faint meowing sound played again in her memory. She pictured a small cat, lost in the darkness. Despite her resigned acceptance of loneliness, she felt a sudden yearning to find the source of that cry. She found it odd. She wasn't exactly a cat person, nor had she grown up with animals. Yet something about that soft, plaintive call stirred her from within, and so began an inconspicuous but crucial shift in her carefully contained life, a quiet turning point she would only recognize much later. The next morning, Clara woke with the same sense of wariness, yet she also remembered the stray sound from the previous night, a cat's meow. Over her lukewarm coffee, she kept glancing at the window, half hoping to see a stray feline wander by. The day was gray and chilly, the kind that made her want to burrow under blankets rather than venture outside. She resolved to go about her editing tasks as usual, but a restlessness grew in her chest, making it hard to focus. What if it really was a cat out there, she wondered. The thought tugged at her, the same way pity had tugged at her heart when she saw the battered house next door, a place that spoke volumes of neglect and longing. By late morning, she found herself at the threshold of her apartment building. Coat thrown hastily over her shoulders, curiosity guiding her steps. She ventured around the corner of the building, passing the fence that separated her apartment complex from the derelict house. At first, the yard looked empty except for a few overgrown shrubs and a tangle of brambles along the fence line. But then she heard a soft mew, so faint she might have missed it if she hadn't been listening carefully. Heart quickening, Clara stepped closer to the fence. Her eyes darted among the bushes, searching for any flash of fur. A moment later, she spotted a small tuxedo cat, black fur with a white chest, crouched under a broken wooden plank that leaned against the old house. It looked miserable, eyes wide in fear, wet from morning dew. She knelt down, unsure whether to approach or retreat. The cat stared at her, ears flattened, but it didn't run. Taking that as permission, Clara crept forward, murmuring quiet reassurances she wasn't sure the cat could understand. She remembered a neighbor once telling her that cats often respond to gentle tones, but she had little experience in such matters. Still, it can't hurt to try, she thought. She extended a hand, keeping it a few inches away. The cat sniffed the air, then issued a weak hiss, more frightened than aggressive. Clara didn't pull away. Instead, she inched backward, giving the cat space. Her gaze traveled over its scrawny frame, noticing grime on its coat and a small scratch on its front paw. "Poor thing," she murmured. "Where do you belong?" She wondered if it was a stray or someone's lost pet. Feeling an unaccustomed tenderness arise, Clara decided she couldn't just leave it there. But she also wasn't sure how to coax it out safely. As she stood, she promised herself she'd return with something, a can of tuna or a dish of milk, and see if it would come closer. Back in her kitchen, Clara rummaged through cupboards. She found a can of tuna she'd bought weeks ago and forgotten about. Carefully opening it, she scooped it into a small bowl and warmed it slightly in the microwave. The pungent smell filled the air, and she scrunched her nose but pressed on, determined to help the frightened creature outside. Armed with the makeshift cat meal, she hurried back, ignoring the drizzle that had begun to fall. At the fence, she placed the bowl near the broken plank and retreated, her heart thumping with a strange excitement. The cat peered out, whiskers twitching. Initially, it didn't move. Clara shivered in the damp air, but she waited patiently, watching the cat's internal struggle between hunger and fear. At last it crept forward, sniffed the bowl, and tentatively began to eat. An odd surge of relief swept through Clara, as if she'd accomplished something monumental. She wanted to reach out and stroke the cat's fur, but she held back. It was enough for now that it was eating. While the cat devoured the tuna, Clara found her thoughts drifting back to her father. He'd been the kind of man who never hesitated to help, whether it was a neighbor with a flat tire or a stray animal in need of shelter. His heart had been wide open, even to the detriment of his own well-being at times. You can't save everything. Her mother had often chided, yet her father would still try. Clara felt a pang of remorse that she hadn't shown that same generosity in her own life. She had always been more guarded, building emotional barriers to protect herself from loss. But seeing the cat's thin body quiver as it licked the last of the tuna reminded her that, sometimes, caring was worth the risk. The drizzle turned into a steady rain. The cat retreated to its makeshift shelter under the plank. With a sigh, Clara realized she should get back inside before the manuscript deadlines crept up on her. She told herself she'd check in on the cat later. Still, as she walked away, the cat's green eyes followed her, and for a moment she thought she glimpsed a flicker of gratitude in its gaze. That afternoon, Clara found it difficult to concentrate. The words in the manuscript she was editing blurred before her eyes. She kept hearing the cat's soft mew, imagining it shivering in the rain. Resolving to do something more, she called the local animal shelter. A woman with a kindly voice answered, explaining that they were operating at capacity but could set an appointment for drop-off if the cat was captured safely. They gave Clara advice: approach it slowly, use soothing words, possibly a humane trap if the cat was truly feral. Clara thanked her but felt a tug of guilt at the thought of handing the cat over to a shelter. Would it thrive in a chaotic place with many other animals? Would it find a home? Trying to calm her mind, she reminded herself that she was no veterinarian. She was just a single woman who knew nothing about caring for a cat. Still, the notion kept pressing that she couldn't walk away now. She'd started something. She'd extended kindness to a living creature. Abandoning it would feel like betraying her father's ideals, betraying the part of her that yearned for connection. In the early evening, the rain lessened. Clara put on her rain boots and shrugged into a heavier jacket, heading back out with another bowl of tuna. This time the cat emerged more quickly. Its eyes still held caution, but its hunger was stronger. As it ate, Clara spoke softly. I don't know your name, little one, or if you even belong to someone. But if you need help, I'm here. She felt silly talking to an animal that couldn't answer back, but it also felt oddly comforting. It was the most intimate conversation she'd had in weeks, which both saddened and amused her. While she was crouched there, a man's voice startled her from behind. You're the second person I've seen feeding that cat today. Clara jumped and turned. A tall, broad-shouldered figure stood at the rickety fence gate, wearing a worn leather jacket and holding an umbrella. His face was partially in shadow, but she could make out a serious expression that softened as he smiled. Sorry, didn't mean to scare you, he said, stepping forward. I'm James. I live just up the road. His gaze flicked to the cat, now slinking back into hiding. Poor thing looks like it's been out here a while. Clara's heart thumped with nerves. She wasn't used to impromptu conversations with strangers, but there was a warmth in James's eyes that eased her. Oh, that's okay, she managed. I'm Clara. Are you the one who was also feeding it? He nodded. Yeah, I came by this morning with some leftover chicken, but it was too skittish to come close. I guess you had better luck with tuna. He offered a faint grin. Have you thought about trying to catch it and bring it inside? This weather's not exactly kind. Clara swallowed, suddenly aware that she was kneeling in muddy ground, hair damp from drizzle. I wasn't sure if it was safe to just pick it up. It's pretty scared. James looked from her to the cat's hiding spot. After a moment, he extended a hand. Why don't we try together? That question sparked a flutter in Clara's chest. She had grown so accustomed to handling everything alone that the simple offer of collaboration felt both foreign and reassuring. She hesitated, then placed her hand in his. The soft drizzle mingled with the quiet pulse of hope in the air. They reconvened that evening in Clara's modest apartment. She offered James a cup of tea while the cat remained outside. Their plan was to get a cat carrier or a box of some sort and coax the animal in with food and gentle persuasion. James lived in a small, rustic cabin on the other side of Pine Harbor, and he'd volunteered to fetch a spare pet carrier he had left over from caring for his late grandmother's cat. While they waited, Clara felt uncharacteristically nervous, uncertain how to navigate conversation with this stranger in her personal space. But James seemed just as unsure, his large hands fiddling with the rim of his teacup. "I'm sorry for barging in like this," he said, glancing around her living room. "I just figured it was easier to talk indoors than in the drizzle." Clara nodded. "No, it's fine. I appreciate the help. I was worried about that cat." She took a sip of tea, inhaling the chamomile's comforting scent. An awkward silence followed, punctuated by the sound of raindrops against the window. Finally, James offered a smile. "So you're fairly new to Pine Harbor, right? I haven't seen you around before." Clara nodded again. She felt slightly embarrassed that she hadn't been more sociable since arriving in town. "Yes, I moved here a few months ago. I'm a freelance editor, so I mostly work from home." Her voice trailed off as she debated whether to share more. The vulnerability of explaining her father's death and her subsequent need to escape her old life felt too raw, but something in James's earnest gaze urged her to be open. So she added softly, "I lost my father recently. Pine Harbor felt like a quiet place to get my bearings." James's expression grew gentle. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said, voice laden with empathy. "I lost my grandmother a year ago. She raised me, so it was tough." He paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle. "This place can be healing, though. The lake, the slower pace. It sort of gives you room to think and grieve." A shared understanding passed between them, forged by common threads of loss and the desire for solace. For a moment, the hush in the apartment felt less lonely and more comforting, as though an unspoken bond had formed. Shortly after, James stood to leave, promising to return in an hour with the carrier. As he reached the door, Clara found herself uncharacteristically bold. "James," she said softly, "thank you." He turned, meeting her gaze with a warm smile. "You're welcome," he replied. "We'll help that cat together." Then he was gone, swallowed by the gray twilight, leaving Clara with a curious swirl of emotions she hadn't felt in a long time. True to his word, James returned, carefully carrying a plastic pet carrier. It looked well used but clean, lined with an old towel for warmth. He placed it on Clara's kitchen floor, then knelt to test the latch. Satisfied, he stood. "Now the trick is to get the cat inside without freaking it out," he said, half grinning. Clara laughed a little, the tension that had coiled in her chest earlier, easing with the light-hearted moment. "I suppose we'll have to be slow and gentle." They ventured back outside together. The evening air was cooler, but at least the rain had stopped. Dusk had settled over the old house next door, and the cat was nowhere in sight. Clara's heart sank with the possibility that it might have wandered off, or worse, that it was too frightened to return. She and James crept around the perimeter, calling softly, clicking their tongues, anything to coax it out. Minutes passed without success. Clara felt a pang of disappointment until she heard the faintest rustling in the bushes. There, nestled beneath tangled branches, she saw two glowing eyes reflected by the street lamp's dim light. "Let me try," James whispered, inching forward. He set the carrier on the ground and scooped a bit of tuna onto a small dish. The cat's eyes flicked from James to Clara, then to the dish. Slowly, it crawled forward, movements stiff with caution. Clara watched with bated breath as it sniffed around the dish, ears perked and tail low. James spoke softly, praising the cat, his voice a gentle murmur of reassurance. Then, in a fluid motion, he guided the cat toward the open carrier door. The cat hesitated, stepping halfway in before backing out again. Clara felt her chest tighten. "Please go in," she silently pleaded. James waited patiently, holding the dish just inside the carrier. Finally, hunger overcame fear, and the cat slunk the rest of the way in. James eased the door shut, careful not to make any sudden noises. Clara exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she was holding, relief flooding her. The cat meowed in protest, but it was safely inside. With the cat secured, they retreated to Clara's apartment, feeling victorious. James set the carrier in the living room. The cat eyed them warily through the bars, as if weighing its next move. "We'll need to check if it has an ID chip, or if anyone's reported a missing cat. Maybe we should see a vet," James said, turning to Clara. She nodded, mind already racing with the next steps. "Right, I know there's a local vet clinic in town, near the post office. I could call them first thing tomorrow." They fell into a companionable silence, the cat occasionally letting out a soft, complaining mew. Then James cleared his throat. "I can leave the carrier with you, if you're all right keeping it here tonight. I've got some cat food at my place, left over from my grandmother's cat, so I could bring some by tomorrow if that helps." His offer was earnest, but Clara hesitated. It had been a long time since she'd let anyone be this helpful, especially someone she barely knew. Yet she couldn't deny the sense of relief at the thought of not doing this alone. "That would be great," she finally said. Their eyes met, and an understanding passed between them. A shared commitment to this small creature, but also a mutual sense of healing that might unfold if they continued down this path. Night settled in as James took his leave. Clara stood by the door, the soft click of the latch echoing in the hallway. In the living room, the cat let out a plaintive meow, drawing her attention. She approached the carrier cautiously, kneeling to speak in quiet tones. "Hello there, sweet kitty," she murmured. "I know this is strange, but we want to help." The cat blinked, tail swishing in mild agitation. Moved by compassion, Clara opened the carrier door a crack, extending her hand gently. The cat sniffed her fingers, then shrank back. She sighed. It would take time for the animal to trust her, if it ever did. She found an old blanket and placed it beside the carrier, leaving the door ajar in case the cat wanted to explore. After setting out a small bowl of water, she flicked off the overhead light and left a dim lamp on, just enough to illuminate the living room so the cat wouldn't be in complete darkness. She hardly slept that night, half listening for sounds from the living room. Just before dawn, she rose to check, tiptoeing into the living room to find the carrier door wide open, but the cat still inside. It regarded her with wary eyes, as though the whole business of being rescued required more energy than it had. A pang of empathy shot through Clara. She recognized that look. It was the same guarded expression she'd seen in her own reflection many times, uncertain whether it was safer to stay hidden or risk stepping out into a world that had hurt her before. With renewed resolve, she prepared for the day. She had client deadlines to meet, but first on her list was calling the local vet. Her father's words echoed in her memory. Perhaps this was another step in building the life he had urged her to find, one filled with compassion, purpose, and maybe even some unexpected connections. Clara dialed the number of the Pine Harbor Veterinary Clinic as soon as it opened. The receptionist, a friendly-sounding woman named Beth, listened attentively to Clara's story about the stray cat. "Bring it in for a quick check," Beth suggested. "We'll scan for a microchip and give it a basic exam. We won't charge for strays." Relieved, Clara set an appointment for that afternoon. In the meantime, she tried to bury herself in editing, but her focus wavered. Every hour or so she glanced into the living room. Sometimes the cat was curled up inside the carrier. Other times it sat on the edge, peering out as if sizing up its new surroundings. The scrawny animal looked slightly more at ease, though it still eyed Clara warily whenever she approached with fresh water or food. She noticed a small notch in its left ear, and it made her wonder about its past. Had it lived in a loving home once? Had it been abandoned? The possibilities tugged at her heart. Around noon, James showed up with a bag of cat food, a scratching post, and a small dish. He grinned sheepishly as he carried them into the living room. "Went a bit overboard," he admitted, placing them down. Clara felt a flare of gratitude. She realized she was smiling more freely than she had in a long time. The two of them watched as the cat eyed the new items with suspicion, slowly padding over to sniff them. James knelt, extending a hand. "Hey, buddy," he said in a soothing tone. "We're taking you to the vet soon, but we promise it's for your own good." Clara cleared her throat softly. "Thanks for bringing all this," she told James. "I really appreciate it." He turned, meeting her gaze. "No problem. I remember how comforting my grandmother's cat was when I was grieving her loss last year. Cats can be a pain, but they can also be good company when you need it." A subtle understanding seemed to pass between them again, a sense that each recognized the other's loneliness. In that shared empathy they found an unspoken bond. Shortly after, they loaded the cat, carrier and all, into James's car, opting to drive together to the clinic. The cat meowed its displeasure throughout the short journey, but James played soft music on the radio, occasionally murmuring words of reassurance. Clara, seated in the passenger seat, felt a pang of warmth every time she glanced over at him. The gentle lines around his eyes, the steady way he held the steering wheel, it filled her with an unaccustomed sense of safety. The Pine Harbor Veterinary Clinic was small and cozy, with a waiting room painted in sunny yellows. Posters of cats and dogs with witty slogans decorated the walls, and a few potted plants rested near the windows. Beth, the receptionist Clara had spoken to earlier, greeted them warmly. "So, here's our stray cat," she said, peeking through the carrier's door. The cat hissed at her intrusion, prompting Beth to chuckle. "Feisty one, huh?" Soon, a young veterinarian named Dr. Rao appeared, ushering them into an exam room. He carefully lifted the cat onto the metal table. Clara's heart thudded as the cat struggled, letting out a frightened yawl. She instinctively moved forward, placing a gentle hand near its head to reassure it. Dr. Rao murmured soothing words before using a small scanner to check for a microchip. A pause, then a shake of his head. "No chip," he confirmed. He did a basic assessment, checking ears, eyes, and that small scratch on its paw. Slight infection, but nothing serious. "The cat's underweight and a bit dehydrated, though," he noted. "With proper care, it should recover nicely." Clara felt both relief and sadness. If there was no chip, there might not be an owner searching. This cat was truly alone, much like she had been feeling these last months. She and James exchanged glances. "So what happens now?" James asked, his voice quiet. "Doctor." Rao offered a kind smile. "Typically, you could bring it to a shelter, but if you're willing to foster it, that might be better. Our shelter is full, so fostering is often easier on the animal, especially one that's already anxious." Clara swallowed. She had never seriously considered adopting a pet before, but a surge of protectiveness welled within her. James's gaze flicked to her, as though silently asking if she was okay with the idea of fostering. After a heartbeat of hesitation, she heard herself say, "I can do it. Or rather, we can, if you'll help me." She glanced at James, who nodded enthusiastically. "Of course." On the car ride home, the cat nestled in its carrier, eyes closed in exhaustion. Clara sat in the passenger seat, mind spinning with the sudden shift in her life. She was not only caring for a stray cat, but also forging a new connection with someone who was, in many ways, still a stranger. And yet, the warmth of this change felt like a soft lamp in a dim room, lighting corners of her heart she hadn't examined in a long time. Days passed, and the cat, which Clara started calling Clover, her father had once told her Clovers were signs of hope, gradually settled into the apartment. Clover remained skittish, often hiding behind the couch or under the coffee table, but with each day's gentle coaxing, the cat grew braver. Clara learned to sit quietly on the floor, letting Clover approach on her own terms. Sometimes, the cat would press her small head into Clara's outstretched palm, a sign of growing trust that warmed Clara from the inside out. James visited often under the pretense of helping with cat duties, though Clara suspected he also enjoyed the company. Together, they set up a small cat bed in a corner near the heater, introduced new toys, and patiently administered medication for Clover's paw infection. In these shared tasks, they found a companionable rhythm, punctuated by playful banter and comfortable silences. Clara discovered that James had a subtle sense of humor, dry and soft-spoken. She also learned about his background. After his grandmother's passing, he'd moved back to her old cabin and worked part-time at a mechanic's shop while figuring out his next step in life. He was good with cars, good with animals, and surprisingly gentle in spirit for someone so outwardly rugged. One evening, after a long day of editing, Clara felt a wave of grief she'd suppressed for months. She sat by the window, Clover perched on her lap, and tears slipped down her cheeks unbidden. The memory of her father's hospital room swirled in her mind. The antiseptic smell, the rhythmic beep of machines, the quiet whisper of respirators. She recalled his last day vividly, the way his eyes, once bright, had grown distant yet somehow held unwavering love for her. His final words still echoed like a gentle echo, "Find a life that brings you joy." Clover shifted, sensing Clara's distress. The cat pressed its small head to her chest, purring quietly. The warmth of that simple gesture unlocked something in Clara's heart. She realized she was no longer alone in her sorrow. She had Clover's silent empathy, and she had James's budding friendship. Tears continued to fall, but in them was a dawning acceptance that maybe she didn't have to carry her grief entirely by herself. That same night, James texted to check on Clover. In a moment of fragile vulnerability, Clara replied, admitting she was having a hard time emotionally. Without hesitation, James offered to swing by if she wanted company. Normally, Clara would have politely refused, but grief had eroded her usual defenses. She said yes. When James arrived, he carried a bag of groceries, ingredients for soup, he explained. He rolled up his sleeves and got to work in her small kitchen, chopping vegetables with practiced ease. The rhythmic chop of the knife blended with the soft hum of the stove, creating a comforting domesticity Clara had almost forgotten existed. She watched him, hands wrapped around a mug of tea, and felt a strange stirring of gratitude. They ate together at her cramped table, spoons clinking against the bowls. Outside, the wind howled, but within those four walls, a sense of safety blossomed. James told her a little more about his grandmother, how she'd been the only stable figure in his childhood, how losing her felt like losing an anchor. Clara shared stories of her father, his generosity, his laughter, his unwavering belief that goodness existed in the world. Through these quiet revelations, they understood each other's grief on a deeper level. After the soup bowls were emptied, James suggested they take Clover out of hiding for a gentle brush, something the vet had recommended for the cat's matted fur. This daily ritual had become a bonding time for them. Clover, though initially squirmy, seemed to surrender to the soothing brushstrokes. Clara sat behind Clover while James stroked the cat's back. Occasionally their hands brushed, causing a flicker of awareness between them. It was a subtle exchange, a tingle of possibility, though neither voiced it. Eventually, the clock moved toward midnight. James yawned, rubbed his eyes, and rose to leave. Before he stepped out, he paused at the door, turning to Clara. In the soft glow of the hallway light, his expression was tender. "If you ever need someone to talk to, or just, I don't know, someone to share soup with, I'm here." Clara felt her chest tighten with a mix of gratitude and an emotion she hadn't dared to name. She nodded, offering a slight smile. "Thank you, James." With that, he left and Clara was once again alone, but this time the solitude felt less oppressive. Clover purred at her feet, and she stroked the cat's head, whispering, "Maybe he's not just a stranger anymore, huh?" In the subsequent weeks, Clara noticed her routine shifting in ways she had never anticipated. Morning coffees no longer felt lonely. Clover would circle her ankles, meowing for breakfast, and the cat's companionship was surprisingly heartening. She still walked by the lake in the evenings, but sometimes James would accompany her. They'd stroll side by side, discussing everything from the changing weather to their career uncertainties. Clara found herself laughing more, occasionally leaning on James's arm when the path grew slippery. She felt the heaviness of grief gradually lighten, replaced by cautious hope. But life seldom unfolds without conflict. The first sign of trouble came in the form of an online notice. Clara stumbled upon a social media post from someone claiming to have lost a tuxedo cat in Pine Harbor. The post was recent and featured a blurry photo that bore a resemblance to Clover, enough that Clara felt a jolt. She read the details. The cat had gone missing over a month ago, the owner devastated. A wave of conflicted emotions rolled through her. If Clover truly belonged to someone else, she should reunite them. That was the right thing to do. But the idea of giving up the cat brought an unexpected ache. Clover had become a companion in her emptiness, an anchor in her grief, and ironically, the bridge that connected her to James. Clara contacted the poster hesitantly, attaching a photo of Clover. She tried to be rational. If this was the cat's real owner, she had a responsibility to do the right thing. But that night, lying awake, anxiety gnawed at her. She replayed images of Clover's trustful gaze, the soft purr that lulled her to sleep. She didn't want to lose that. She forced herself to remember that love, in all forms, often involved letting go. Her father's death had taught her that one couldn't cling to things forever. Sometimes, giving someone back what they'd lost was an act of love too. The next day, a reply appeared in her inbox. The poster was certain Clara's cat was not the missing one after all. Different markings on the face, apparently. Relief flooded Clara, so overpowering it almost frightened her. She realized she had grown more attached to Clover than she'd admitted. While she didn't know what shape her future with this cat would take, she breathed a deep sigh of gratitude that, for now, Clover would remain in her life. Encouraged by the reprieve, Clara allowed herself to grow more attached, not just to Clover but also to the subtle presence James had assumed in her life. They spoke every day, sometimes about mundane things like grocery lists or cat food, other times about deeper topics, regrets, longings, cherished memories of departed loved ones. Occasionally, the older part of Clara that guarded her heart flared up, warning her that letting someone in meant risking pain. After all, she had lost her father, who was to say she wouldn't lose James too. One chilly afternoon, when Clara was out for her usual lake walk, she spotted James standing by the shoreline skipping stones. The sky was overcast, the water dull gray. She approached quietly, drawn by the thoughtful expression on his face. When he noticed her, he managed a smile, but it was tinged with sadness. Without explaining, he handed her a smooth pebble. She tossed it and watched it skip once, twice, 3 times before sinking. They stood side by side, wordless for a moment, the hush of the lake enveloping them. Eventually, James exhaled, placing his hands in his jacket pockets. "I got some news today," he said softly. "My grandmother's cabin, well, it's actually under a mortgage I can't afford for much longer. I need to decide if I'm going to sell it or find a better, paying job to cover the payments." The confession seemed to weigh on him. Clara reached out, gently touching his arm. "I'm sorry. That's tough." He nodded, gaze fixed on a distant fishing boat. "I feel guilty selling it. She loved that place. But I'm also not sure I want to stay here indefinitely. I only moved back to settle her affairs and figure out my life. Now, I feel like I'm in limbo." His voice cracked on the last word. Clara felt the sting of empathy. She understood the feeling of being adrift all too well, stuck between what was lost and what the future might hold. Taking a breath, she found the courage to speak what her heart felt. "I've been wandering in that same limbo, James," she admitted. "Grief brought me here, but maybe we can figure out how to move forward. Together." It was a quiet question, tinged with uncertainty. She didn't expect a grand declaration in response, just the comfort of shared understanding. James turned, eyes warm despite the shadows on his face. "I'd like that," he said simply. And in that moment, amid the cold wind rustling the bare branches, they stood closer, neither fully sure of the path ahead, but willing to explore it hand in hand. Yet, as the days stretched toward winter, a growing tension simmered between them. James wrestled with financial realities, applying for jobs in nearby towns that might allow him to keep the cabin. Clara wrestled with her own ambitions, or lack thereof, unsure if she wanted to remain in Pine Harbor forever. The fragile bud of connection between them trembled under the weight of these uncertainties. On a particularly frigid evening, after returning from a day of job hunting, James arrived at Clara's doorstep looking withdrawn. "No luck," he murmured, stepping inside to warm up. Clover meowed in greeting, winding around his ankles. He bent down to scratch the cat's ears, a faint smile ghosting his lips. When he straightened, his eyes met Clara's. "I'm starting to think selling the cabin might be the only option." His despair was palpable. Clara tried to reassure him, offering tea and gentle words, but she sensed he was pulling away, burying his anxiety. They settled into her living room, but the usual warm conversation was absent. Silence draped over them, broken occasionally by Clover's inquisitive purrs. Finally, James spoke, voice tight with frustration. "I just feel like I'm failing her memory. I promised I'd keep that place alive." Clara inhaled sharply. Her own guilt about not fulfilling her father's final wishes resonated. She reached out to take James's hand. "We can't do everything perfectly," she said, her own voice shaking. "Maybe honoring their memory isn't about holding on to physical places, but carrying their spirit forward in what we do." She thought of her father's generous heart, how he'd always prioritize people over property or possessions. She tried to channel his perspective now. James sighed, but his gaze softened. "You might be right. It's just letting go is so hard." Clara squeezed his hand, a silent gesture of solidarity. She recalled how fiercely she had tried to deny her father's illness, how she'd clung to hope even when the prognosis grew dire. The process of releasing was painful, but in time it revealed new paths. She wanted James to see that for himself. As the night grew late, they found themselves on the couch, exhausted from emotional turmoil. Clover hopped up, nestling between them as if bridging the gap. They petted the cat, the soft fur a soothing distraction. In that quiet intimacy, James murmured, "Sometimes I wonder if I should just leave Pine Harbor, start fresh somewhere else." Clara's heart stung at the thought. "You could," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "But I'd miss you." The honesty of that admission left her vulnerable. James's eyes flicked to her, reflecting an equal measure of fear and longing. "I'd miss you too," he whispered. The unspoken question hung between them. Were they willing to risk the pain of change for the chance at love and a new beginning? Winter's first snowfall came abruptly one morning. Clara woke to a soft blanket of white covering the street outside her window, swirling flakes drifting lazily in the gray sky. Clover seemed fascinated, perched on the windowsill, tail flicking back and forth as she watched the snow fall. Clara smiled at the cat's curiosity and decided to venture out for a short walk before tackling her editing projects. Bundling up in a scarf and gloves, she stepped onto the front stoop. The cold air pinched her cheeks, but the pristine calm of fresh snow was enchanting. As she walked, her boots crunching softly, she noticed footprints leading to the old, abandoned house next door. Curious, she followed them around back, where she found James, of all people, peering through a dusty window. He startled when he realized he wasn't alone. "Oh, Clara." "Morning," he said, rubbing his hands together for warmth. "What are you doing here?" she asked, stepping closer. He shrugged, nodding toward the decrepit structure. "I was just looking around, thinking about real estate." When he saw her puzzled expression, he continued, "I had a chat with a realtor. She mentioned that this house might go for cheap, given its condition. I don't have enough for my grandmother's cabin, but maybe this could be an option. It needs a ton of work, but it might be a project I can manage." Clara blinked, staring at the broken windows and sagging roofline. "You'd buy this place?" The idea startled her, but as she studied James's face, she saw a flicker of hope that had been absent for days. "It could be a fresh start," he said, voice quiet. "I'm pretty good with repairs. It'd keep me in Pine Harbor, and it wouldn't feel like I'm trying to replace my grandmother's cabin, more like forging something new." She processed this, conflicting emotions swirling within her. On one hand, the place was in dismal shape. She worried James might be biting off more than he could chew. On the other, she admired the spark of determination in his eyes. "I could come by and help you fix it up," she offered impulsively, surprising even herself. "We could make it a home." The last word hovered, charged with meaning. James's lips curved in a tentative smile. "Yeah," he said softly. "We could." They stood there for a moment in the crisp winter air, a shared vision of possibility forming. The old house, a once forgotten wreck, now glowed with the promise of new beginnings. Much like the stray cat that had once crouched in its yard, or the two grieving hearts that had found solace in each other. The following weeks marked a whirlwind of activity. James put in an offer on the house, well below market value due to its disrepair, and to his astonishment it was accepted. The news spread quickly through Pine Harbor. Some neighbors doubted his sanity, others admired his courage. Clara stood firmly in the second camp, though a small part of her worried about the financial and emotional toll. Still, she helped him contact contractors for an inspection and plan out potential renovations. In the meantime, Clover thrived under Clara's care. The cat had gained weight and grown noticeably more affectionate. Each night, Clover would curl beside Clara as she read or edited manuscripts, a silent companion offering comfort. James joked that Clover was more like a roommate than a pet, and Clara couldn't dispute the observation. The cat's presence had changed the atmosphere of her apartment, breathing life into corners that once felt suffocatingly quiet. Christmas drew near, and the town began to twinkle with holiday lights. The local shops decorated their storefronts, and a communal tree lighting ceremony took place by the lake. Clara watched from the crowd, James at her side, as the massive pine tree lit up in a splash of colors. Children cheered, couples held hands, and a choir sang carols. It was a scene of warmth and belonging, a sharp contrast to how she'd felt just months ago when she arrived, burdened by grief. As they strolled away from the festivities, James slipped his gloved hand into Clara's. The gentle pressure felt reassuring. "I have something for you," he murmured, guiding her toward a quiet bench. From his jacket pocket, he produced a small wrapped package. Inside was a handmade leather bookmark embossed with her initials. "I know how important books are to you," he said, his voice a bit shy. "Thought you might like something personal." Touched, Clara ran her fingers over the smooth leather, her throat tightening with emotion. "It's perfect," she whispered. Reaching into her own coat, she pulled out an envelope. I got you something too." Inside were sketches she'd commissioned from a local artist, depicting Clover, James's grandmother's old cat, and a cozy rustic house. "For your new place," she explained. "Something to remind you that you're never really alone." James's eyes glistened as he studied the sketches. Then he clasped her hands in his, voice trembling slightly as he said, "Thank you, Clara. This means more than I can say." The connection between them felt nearly tangible, a gentle current of understanding and hope. In the distance, the soft glow of holiday lights shimmered on the lake's surface, reflecting the fledgling sense of peace that had begun to illuminate both their hearts. By mid-January, James's house purchase was finalized. He walked through the front door for the first time as the official owner. Technically, the proud owner of a near ruin. Clara followed him into the dusty foyer, where creaking floorboards and peeling wallpaper greeted them. The place smelled faintly of mold and water stains marred the ceiling. She coughed, covering her nose with a sleeve. "This is definitely a fixer-upper," she said, trying to sound upbeat. James laughed, the sound echoing eerily in the empty space. "You're telling me." But beneath the humor was determination. First steps addressed the leak in the roof, get the electrical sorted, and probably replace the plumbing. Clara couldn't help but admire him. She saw the glint in his eyes, the belief that this wreck of a house could become a home. She offered a smile. "I can help with painting, maybe some sanding. I'm not very handy, but I can learn." They spent the afternoon making lists of repairs. James pried open a couple of windows to let fresh air in, sending motes of dust swirling. Clara took photos to document the before stage, imagining the day they'd stand in a fully renovated living room, proud of how far they'd come. Occasionally, she'd catch James watching her with a thoughtful expression. She wasn't entirely sure what it meant, but she felt her cheeks warm under his gaze. Later, they retreated to Clara's apartment, where Clover greeted them. They ordered takeout pizza and spread the floor plans on the coffee table, discussing layout ideas between bites. The atmosphere was cozy, filled with quiet excitement. At one point, James hesitated, then asked, "Would you ever consider? I mean, if it was fixed up enough, would you want to stay there?" His question hung in the air. Clara's heart pounded. "Live with you?" she asked, half disbelieving. He looked away, cheeks flushing slightly. "Not right away, but eventually, if you wanted. I just feel like this house is as much your dream as mine now. You're the one who helped me see the potential." Her mind raced. The thought of cohabitating was both thrilling and terrifying. She was still learning how to let people in, still mourning her father. But this was James. Patient, kind, and equally flawed. The idea of a shared life with him and Clover in a home they rebuilt together tugged at her heartstrings. She reached across the table and laced her fingers through his. "Let's build it first," she said gently, "and maybe we'll find our way there together." Relief and hope flickered in James's eyes. They exchanged a tentative smile, acknowledging the enormity of what lay ahead, but trusting in the quiet bond that had formed since that day in the rain, when a lost cat had first brought them together. The following months tested their patience and resolve. Harsh winter storms delayed the roof repairs. An electrical short blew the house's fuse box, requiring a complete overhaul. Contractors came and went, some reliable, others less so. Bills piled up, and James had to pick up extra shifts at the mechanic's shop. Clara juggled her editing deadlines with frequent visits to the site, where she helped with tasks like scraping old wallpaper or painting primer onto newly repaired walls. Amid the stress, they found small moments of joy. Sometimes, they'd take a break and sip hot chocolate in the gutted living room, imagining how they'd decorate once it was finished. Other times, they'd work side by side in comfortable silence, Clover observing them from a pet bed they'd brought over so she could roam safely in whichever room was free of construction hazards. The cat seemed at ease, as if she belonged there with them, supervising each step of the transformation. Their relationship deepened through shared labor and mutual support, but conflicts arose too, minor disagreements over budget or color schemes that occasionally erupted in frustration. Once, late at night, Clara found herself snapping at James because he insisted on a particular shade of blue for the kitchen tiles that she found too dark. Immediately, she regretted her tone, realizing it stemmed from exhaustion and her lingering fear of commitment. James, equally on edge, snapped back. For a tense half-hour, they avoided each other, each nursing hurt feelings. But eventually, they talked it out, apologizing for letting stress overshadow their empathy. In these conflicts, they learned about each other's boundaries and insecurities. James admitted he sometimes felt unworthy of happiness, worried he'd let her down the way he felt he'd let his grandmother down. Clara admitted she was afraid of losing him after letting her guard down, a remnant of the trauma she felt from losing her father. Their shared honesty only strengthened their bond. Gradually, the house began to look more like a home, and they began to see themselves as partners, not just in repairs, but in the delicate craft of healing and building a future together. Spring arrived with a flurry of blossoms and milder breezes. By now, the old house next door was unrecognizable from the day Clara had first spotted Clover hiding in its yard. The roof was sturdy, the walls patched and freshly painted a warm off-white. James planned to install new hardwood floors. He'd saved up enough to buy planks of oak, and Clara had spent hours researching how to stain and seal them. They were nearly ready for the final phase, moving furniture into the living spaces, hanging curtains, making it truly theirs. One sunny afternoon, the couple stood on the porch, gazing out at the street. The same quiet road where Clara once peered from her apartment window, feeling utterly alone, now thrummed with the promise of togetherness. Clover weaved between their legs, meowing her approval. James took Clara's hand, a soft smile lighting his features. "I asked for time off next week," he said, "to finish the floors. After that, maybe we can move in." His voice trembled with excitement and a tinge of nerves. Clara leaned her head on his shoulder, a contented sigh escaping her lips. "It sounds perfect," she whispered. Her father's memory flickered in her mind, his gentle guidance to find a life filled with joy and purpose. She felt certain he'd be smiling at this moment, proud that she had dared to love again, dared to rebuild her shattered heart in the face of loss. She looked up at James, eyes shining. "I never would have guessed a lost cat would be the one to bring me back to life," she murmured, a note of wonder in her voice. He grinned, bending down to stroke Clover's head. "Funny how the smallest things can change everything," he replied. "And how strangers become the people you can't imagine living without." They stood there for a while, savoring the shared silence, the warmth of the sun on their faces, the soft purr of the cat that bound them. When they finally stepped inside, it was into a house brimming with possibility. Loose planks of oak leaned against the wall. A few unopened boxes of fixtures waited to be installed. But the real sense of completion lay in the love filling the space. Love born of kindness, patience, and shared determination. Love that honored the past and embraced the future. As Clover scampered ahead, tail high and confident, Clara followed with James at her side, heart lighter than it had been in ages. In that simple gesture, walking forward into a home they were creating together, the promise of a new chapter unfurled. Their story was not without scars, but each scar bore witness to resilience and compassion. This was the life her father had encouraged her to find, and at long last, she felt its steady pulse. Grief would always remain a part of her, and James would always carry echoes of his own losses, but in one another, they had discovered a reason to hope, to build, and to trust that the home they needed could be found not just within four walls, but in the shelter of each other's hearts. And so, in the echo of Clover's purring and the warmth of clasped hands, two strangers, once lost in their own sadness, found the kind of solace and companionship that makes all the difference. Their story, sparked by a small cat's plaintive cry, grew into something that would guide them through the seasons of life, a quiet testament that even in the face of loneliness and loss, love can find its way home.